After my husband's funeral, his billionaire boss called, "Don't tell your family." The last person I expected to hear from after my husband's funeral was the richest man in our state. I was still standing beside the fresh mound of dirt, watching the last black umbrellas disappear across the cemetery, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. My husband, Daniel, had been buried less than 20 minutes earlier after police ruled his death a tragic highway accident on his way home from work. My sister had already started arguing with me about selling our house because, according to her, you won't be able to afford it alone. My father-in-law had quietly asked whether Daniel had left him anything in his will before he even hugged his grandchildren. Everyone seemed interested in what Daniel had left behind instead of the man we had just buried. Then I answered the call. "Mrs. Carter?" a calm, older voice asked. "This is Richard Ashford." The name hit me instantly. Richard Ashford was the billionaire CEO whose company employed thousands of people across America. Daniel had worked there for nearly 12 years as nothing more than a maintenance supervisor. I couldn't imagine why a man like Ashford would call me personally. Before I could even thank him for attending the funeral, he interrupted me. "Listen carefully. I don't have much time. Whatever happens over the next few days, don't tell your family that I contacted you. Trust no one until we meet." My heartbeat stumbled. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. He lowered his voice. "Your husband wasn't just one of my employees." Then the line went dead. I stared at the silent screen while cold wind swept across the cemetery. When I turned around, I caught my brother-in-law, Eric, standing beside his truck, watching me from across the parking lot. The second our eyes met, he quickly looked away and climbed into his vehicle. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe grief was making me paranoid. But for the first time since Daniel's death, something inside me whispered that the accident wasn't the whole story. I drove home with our 2 children asleep in the back seat, replaying that single sentence over and over. Your husband wasn't just one of my employees. Daniel had always been humble. He never wore expensive clothes, never bragged about work, and never brought confidential business home. Whenever I asked what he actually did all day, he'd smile and say, "Mostly fixing problems before they become disasters." I always assumed he meant broken machinery. Now I wasn't so sure. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Eric's pickup parked across the street again. He pretended to be looking at his phone, but the moment I parked, he drove away without ever getting out. A chill spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the November air. The next morning started with another betrayal I never expected. Before I even poured my first cup of coffee, my father-in-law arrived carrying a folder. "The family needs to discuss Daniel's assets," he announced as if my husband had been dead for years instead of one night. I invited him inside only because my children were eating breakfast and I didn't want a scene. Minutes later my sister arrived without calling. Then my cousin. Then Daniel's aunt. Suddenly my living room looked less like a house in mourning and more like a business meeting. They asked questions that made my stomach turn. Did Daniel have life insurance? How much is left on the mortgage? Will you sell his truck? What about his retirement account? Nobody asked how the kids slept. Nobody asked whether I had eaten. I kept hearing Ashford's warning echoing inside my head, "Don't tell your family." So I said nothing about the phone call. Around noon, someone knocked on the front door. Standing outside was a sharply dressed woman carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked politely. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Richard Ashford." The room instantly fell silent. Every relative turned toward her. My father-in-law stepped forward before I could answer. "We're family. You can tell us whatever you came to say." The woman didn't even glance at him. She looked directly at me. "Mr. Ashford requested that I speak with Mrs. Carter privately." My sister laughed nervously. "Whatever this is, we're all family here." The attorney's expression hardened. Actually, his instructions were very specific. No one else. My relatives exchanged suspicious looks. My father-in-law folded his arms. Daniel worked maintenance. Why would a billionaire send a lawyer to my daughter-in-law? The attorney calmly reached into her briefcase and handed me a sealed envelope marked confidential. Across the front, in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Only Emily. Open alone." My hands began shaking before I even touched it. My sister leaned over my shoulder. "Open it." I stepped backward. "No." My father-in-law's voice suddenly became sharp. "If Daniel left something important, the family deserves to know." "No," I repeated more firmly. The attorney nodded once. "Excellent choice." Then she quietly added something only I could hear. "Someone in this room has already lied to the police." Every sound disappeared. I searched each face around me. My father-in-law looked offended. My sister looked confused. My cousin refused to meet my eyes. Before I could ask another question, the attorney slipped me a business card. "Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Come alone." She walked away without another word. The moment her card disappeared, my relatives exploded with questions. I lied for the first time in my marriage. "It's just paperwork from Daniel's company." Nobody believed me. I could see it in their faces. That evening, after everyone finally left, I locked every door, waited until the children were asleep, and carried the sealed envelope into our bedroom. My hands trembled so violently I could barely break the wax seal. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was a handwritten letter from Daniel and a small silver key taped to the page. The first sentence stole every breath from my lungs. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means I failed to make it home. Please forgive me for the secrets I had to keep." Tears blurred the ink, but I forced myself to continue. Daniel wrote that for the last 4 years he had secretly worked with a federal task force after uncovering evidence that millions of dollars were disappearing from Ashford Industries through a sophisticated criminal network. He explained that he had never been a simple maintenance supervisor. His position gave him unrestricted access to facilities, allowing him to quietly gather evidence without attracting attention. He wrote that several FBI agents knew his true role, but almost nobody inside the company did. Then came the sentence that made my blood freeze. "The people stealing from the company don't know who I really am, unless someone close to me betrayed me." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The next page listed only 3 names under the words people who knew I was helping investigators. The first was Richard Ashford. The second was Special Agent Laura Bennett. The third made the room spin around me. It was Eric, my brother-in-law. At that exact moment, headlights swept across my bedroom wall. I looked through the curtains and saw Eric's pickup slowly rolling into my driveway. He stepped out carrying a shovel over one shoulder. Then he smiled as he looked directly toward my bedroom window. My phone vibrated. A text from the billionaire appeared on the screen. Do not let Eric know you've opened the letter. We're already outside. I looked back toward the window and realized 3 black SUVs had silently surrounded my house. I didn't move. I couldn't. One hand gripped Daniel's letter while the other clutched the silver key so tightly its edges dug into my palm. Outside, Eric stopped halfway across the yard with the shovel resting on his shoulder, scanning the dark windows of my house as if he were making sure everyone inside was asleep. Then another text from Richard Ashford flashed across my screen. Turn off every light. Do not open the front door unless you hear my voice. Before I could respond, my daughter's bedroom door creaked open behind me. Mom, 8-year-old Lily whispered, rubbing her eyes. Who's outside? Fear hit harder than grief ever had. Whatever was happening was no longer just about Daniel. My children were in the middle of it now. I forced a smile, knelt beside her, and whispered, Go wake your brother. Take him into the bathroom and lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you. She saw something in my face that made her stop asking questions. Seconds later I heard the bathroom lock click into place. Outside, Eric walked onto the porch and knocked 3 slow times. Emily, he called warmly. I couldn't sleep. I just wanted to check on you. The kindness in his voice made my stomach turn because I had just read Daniel's handwriting accusing him of betrayal. Another knock followed, louder this time. Emily, I know you're awake. Then the doorbell rang. Again. And again. My phone vibrated once more. He's stalling, Ashford texted. Don't answer. Suddenly, every porch light on the street went dark at exactly the same moment. Black SUVs rolled silently into position, their headlights off. Eric noticed them too. His smile disappeared. He stepped backward, tightening his grip on the shovel. Before he could react, men wearing FBI jackets emerged from the darkness, weapons drawn. Federal agents. Drop it, one shouted. Eric didn't hesitate. He threw the shovel toward the nearest agent and sprinted across my front lawn. The neighborhood exploded with flashing red and blue lights as police cruisers raced in from both ends of the street. I watched through the curtains as Eric jumped into his truck, slammed the accelerator, and tore away, smashing through a patrol car before disappearing into the night. The entire chase lasted less than 20 seconds, but when it ended, one truth was impossible to deny. Daniel's letter had been right. A firm knock came at the door. This time a familiar voice spoke calmly. Emily, it's Richard Ashford. I unlocked the door to find the billionaire standing beside 2 FBI agents and a woman in a navy suit. She stepped forward first. Special Agent Laura Bennett, she said, showing her badge. Your husband saved more lives than you'll probably ever know. Ashford removed his coat as though he had forgotten the freezing rain falling around us. He looked nothing like the competent businessman I had seen on television. He looked exhausted. Older. Haunted. The second he stepped inside, his eyes landed on Daniel's letter in my hands. "He trusted you enough to leave that," he said quietly. "That means he expected the worst." I swallowed hard. "Tell me the truth. Was my husband murdered?" No one answered immediately. Agent Bennett looked toward Ashford before speaking. "The official investigation called it an accident because we were trying to protect the operation. But after what happened tonight..." She paused. "We believe Daniel's brakes were deliberately tampered with." My knees nearly gave out. Ashford caught my arm before I fell. Rage replaced grief so quickly it almost frightened me. "You knew?" I demanded. "You buried him knowing someone killed him?" Ashford's voice cracked for the first time. "I begged the Bureau to tell you sooner. They believed whoever ordered the murder would expose themselves if they thought the investigation was over." Agent Bennett opened a tablet and placed it on my kitchen table. Security footage filled the screen. Grainy images showed Daniel leaving work the night he died. A hooded mechanic crouched beside his truck minutes before he drove away. The man kept his face hidden, but when he stood up, a tattoo became visible on his wrist. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen it at family barbecues for years. Eric had gotten that eagle tattoo after leaving the army. My hand started shaking uncontrollably. "No," I whispered. "He was Daniel's brother." Ashford nodded sadly. "Which is exactly why Daniel never wanted to believe it. He kept searching for another explanation." Then Agent Bennett placed a thick evidence folder in front of me. "There's something even worse." Inside were bank transfers totaling nearly $22 million. Every transfer led to shell companies controlled by Eric and one other person. I stared at the final name until the letters blurred. It belonged to my own father-in-law. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. My father-in-law, the man who cried over Daniel's coffin, hugged my children, and asked about the life insurance before the funeral flowers had even wilted, had been secretly taking millions while his own son risked everything to expose the truth. "That's impossible," I whispered. "He loved Daniel." Agent Bennett slowly shook her head. "We believe he loved the money more." Ashford walked toward the fireplace and removed a framed family photo of Daniel smiling with both children. He stared at it silently before speaking. "Your husband refused every offer I made to pull him out of the investigation. He knew they suspected there was a whistleblower. He also knew the closer we got to proving the theft, the greater the danger became." I looked down at the silver key still resting in my hand. "What does this open?" Ashford's expression changed instantly. "He actually gave it to you?" I nodded. Agent Bennett looked genuinely surprised. "Then he never stopped preparing for this." Ashford took a slow breath. "There's a private safety deposit box Daniel rented under a federal alias. Whatever is inside has never been recovered." Before anyone could say another word, every phone in the room buzzed at once. Agent Bennett glanced at hers and her face drained of color. "He's gone." "Who?" I asked. She looked straight at me. "Eric just escaped the police pursuit." At that exact moment, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Glass shattered. Lily screamed. Every FBI agent reached for their weapon as someone began running across the second floor of my house, even though every officer had been standing downstairs only a second before. Lily's scream ripped through the house so violently that every conversation stopped. Agent Bennett was already halfway up the stairs before the echo faded, her weapon raised as two FBI agents rushed past her. Ashford grabbed my arm to keep me behind them, but I pulled free the instant I heard my son's terrified voice calling, "Mom." My heart pounded so hard it drowned out everything else. The upstairs hallway was filled with broken glass from the shattered bathroom window. The cold night air poured inside. Lily and Noah were huddled together against the bathtub, crying, while an agent swept every room with a flashlight. "Clear," another agent shouted from the guest bedroom. Bennett stepped carefully toward the broken window and looked outside. Fresh footprints led across the flower bed below. Whoever had broken in hadn't stayed. They had come for something, and left in seconds. Then one of the agents bent down beside the sink. "Ma'am," he called. "You need to see this." Lying on the bathroom counter was a single folded sheet of paper. My name was written across it in Eric's handwriting. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. "Emily, you're looking in the wrong place. Daniel died because he trusted the wrong billionaire. Ask Ashford what happened in Afghanistan. Ask him why Daniel never talked about the mission that changed everything." The room fell silent. Slowly, I turned toward Richard Ashford. For the first time since he'd entered my home, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear of Eric. It was fear of the question. "What mission?" I asked quietly. Ashford didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, as if reopening a wound he'd spent years trying to bury. "Daniel wasn't just an employee," he finally said. "Long before he worked for me, he saved my life." Ashford asked everyone except Agent Bennett to leave the room. The children were escorted downstairs, where officers stayed with them, while the three of us stood surrounded by broken glass and unanswered questions. 21 years ago, Ashford began, I wasn't a billionaire. I was a Defense Department contractor assigned to support a classified operation in Afghanistan. I stared at him, stunned. Daniel had served in the army before we met, but he rarely spoke about those years. Whenever I asked, he'd simply say, "Some memories belong to the people who never came home." Ashford continued, his voice growing heavier with every word. "Our convoy was ambushed in the mountains. Half our team was killed within minutes. I was trapped inside a burning vehicle with shrapnel in my leg. Everyone believed I was already dead, except Daniel." Agent Bennett quietly added, "His military records about that mission remain partially classified." Ashford nodded. "Daniel ran back into enemy fire while everyone else retreated. He dragged me nearly a mile through rough terrain under constant gunfire. He saved 3 other soldiers before collapsing from blood loss himself." My eyes filled with tears. That sounded exactly like the man I married. The man who would stop to help strangers change flat tires. The man who secretly paid a neighbor's rent after her husband lost his job. Ashford looked at me with unmistakable respect. "Everything I built afterward happened because your husband refused to leave me behind. I promised him that if I ever had the means, I'd spend my life honoring that debt." He reached into his wallet and removed a worn photograph. It showed 4 young soldiers covered in dust beside a military helicopter. One of them was Daniel, smiling despite a bandaged shoulder. Another was a much younger Richard Ashford. But the fourth face made my blood run cold. It was Eric. Standing beside Daniel with one arm around his shoulder, smiling like a brother. Eric was there too? I whispered. Ashford nodded grimly. Yes. That's where everything began. Agent Bennett stepped closer. After the mission, investigators suspected someone had leaked the convoy's route to hostile forces. They never found enough evidence to charge anyone. I slowly looked back at the photograph. You're saying Eric may have betrayed his own unit? Bennett didn't answer directly. Instead, she said something far worse. We're saying Daniel spent the next 20 years trying to prove it. Ashford carefully took the silver key from my hand and looked at it for a long moment before giving it back. The safety deposit box isn't just evidence about the stolen money, he said quietly. Daniel believed it contained the final proof connecting the Afghanistan betrayal to everything happening today. My mind raced. The company, the money. Daniel's death. All of it started 20 years ago? Ashford nodded. Someone who escaped justice back then built an entire criminal empire afterward. Daniel finally got close enough to expose it. Before I could process another word, an FBI radio crackled downstairs. Agent Bennett, we've got movement. She rushed to the window overlooking the street. Black SUVs were suddenly speeding toward the house from every direction, tires screaming against the wet pavement. But they weren't FBI vehicles. Every one of them had their headlights off. Officers outside immediately took defensive positions. Someone shouted through a loudspeaker, "Everyone inside, stay away from the windows." Then the first explosion rocked the neighborhood. It wasn't a bomb. A black SUV had deliberately slammed into the FBI command vehicle parked in front of my house, flipping it onto its side. Gunfire erupted. Glass shattered downstairs. My children screamed again. Ashford pulled me to the floor as bullets ripped through the upstairs wind.